I'm David Johnston, and I'm ready to start digging deep.
I'm Mark Sutcliffe. Welcome to Digging Deep, presented by Zen Books. Digging Deep is a series of one-on-one conversations in which I chat with thoughtful, accomplished people who have really interesting perspectives to share. They come from many different fields: business, music, media, entertainment, and more. And it's all about hearing their life stories and the lessons, the powerful observations, the unique perspectives that they can share with all of us. Our guest today is David Johnston. You know how you have people in your life that you just want to emulate and copy, be exactly like them? At the top of the list for me is David Johnston. Now, I could spend the next hour talking about all of his accomplishments. He was a lawyer, a university president. He has authored or co-authored more than 30 books. He's been married to his wife Sharon for 56 years. He has 5 daughters and 14 grandchildren. And of course, David Johnston was Governor General of Canada from 2010 to 2017, and he established the Rideau Hall Foundation, which he still chairs. But I want to talk more about the kind of person David Johnston is. To me, he's the personification of kindness and thoughtfulness. I think he demonstrates everything that is great about being Canadian. He has such wisdom about so many things. Listen to how often he steers the conversation away from himself and toward other people. There's so many valuable insights into how he relates to others and surrounds himself with the very best. In our discussion, we also talk about what he calls two-legged excellence. Really interesting stuff. About developing a value system, the servant leader approach to management, how kindness has had a huge impact on his life, and what we all can learn from a decision that he made in his university days that he says still haunts him. There are so many valuable lessons in this discussion. Now, just before we get started, I want to remind you, if you like what you hear, please post a review on iTunes and elsewhere and share this podcast with your network. Also, please subscribe to it. If you're looking for more information about the show, if you want to read my daily blog, where I post short observations and lessons about business and leadership every single day of the year, or if you want to subscribe to my newsletter, The Weekly Dig, which has 5 very quick items I've learned about each week, then please go to our website, letsdigdeep.com. You can also find a link to my TEDx talk. Again, it's letsdigdeep.com. Now, let's start digging deep with David Johnston. All right, David, it is a great pleasure to welcome you to the podcast. I'm so grateful for your time, and I have to say as well, your friendship over the last few years, as you and I have had the opportunity to get to know each other. I've been very lucky to have that opportunity. So thank you for that, and thank you for your time today.
And you as well, Mark. A delight to be with you, and friendship has been so key and precious.
We're going to talk a lot about your life and many of the lessons that you've learned as Governor General, as a university leader, as an academic, as a writer. But I wanted to start by asking you some of our rapid fire questions. So let's start with, what is your fondest childhood memory?
Well, there's so many. I suppose they would be largely figured around sports, Mark. And one that sticks in my mind, just in terms of the kindness of strangers, is we were playing a game. I think I was 14 in the one indoor arena in Sault Ste. Marie. And the day before, I got a call from the owner of a local sporting goods store, Mr. Taylor, who said, come to my store an hour and a half before the game. I've got something for you. I came there, and he had a brand new pair of skates for me. And it was the first piece of new equipment that I've ever had in all my time as a young hockey player. And put the skates on, and I scored 3 goals that night. It was all the skates. It was like Hans Brinker and the Silver Blades. That was pretty exciting. And I think it was, moment. Yeah, and special also in the sense of here was someone who only knew me as a kid playing hockey in the local community, and just reached out and did something that was very, very kind. And it's remained with me always, is the kindness of strangers.
Who was your hero when you were 10 years old?
Probably one of the local hockey players who was also a teacher in our school. I didn't realize it at the time, but I guess he helped to translate my passion for athletic things into my passion for education and learning, and he epitomized it, and so he meant a lot to me.
Yeah. So who was that?
So a fellow by the name of Don Rope. He grew up in Winnipeg and went to St. Michael's College in Toronto, and I think on a scholarship and as a hockey player, played junior A with St. Mike's, and then played with the Kitchener-Waterloo Dutchman Olympic team, as a matter of fact, and then completed his teaching degree, I guess, at the University of Toronto, and then came to teach in Sault Ste. Marie for a year or two while he was playing with the senior hockey team in Sault Ste. Marie. And I kept in touch with him. He then moved to Galt, back to the Kitchener area. And when I came to Waterloo as president of the University of Waterloo, Don had then retired, but we struck up our friendship again. And he always attended the ceremony we had for the Academic All-Canadians, that is the students at the university who were both Dean's Honor List academically and played on a varsity team. We had a special reception for them, and he was kind of a featured guest, and I would point to him as a person that taught me about two-legged people who can excel both in the classroom and also on the playing field.
Oh, that's so nice. So what did you think you were going to be when you grew up?
I think at that age, probably had aspirations to play professional hockey, Mark, as probably half of the 10 or 12-year-olds in the country right now.
And what is your life story in 6 words?
Well, in 4, it would be born lucky in Canada.
What's your greatest mistake, and what did you learn from it?
Well, I think we need 3 days together, Mark, for me to tell you about the many mistakes I've made, and I think you learn more from your mistakes than your successes. One that haunts me to this day, again, is a sporting story, Mark. I went to college in the States and then went on to do law in England at Cambridge, and played on the ice hockey team, as they called it, in Cambridge. And I was the captain in Oxford and Cambridge. You don't have actual coaches for the teams, so the captain really functions as a playing coach. And in the final game with Oxford, we had 2 forward lines and 2 spares and 3 defensemen, as a matter of fact. And the 2 spares were terrific young men who were not good skaters, but they were good athletes, and they'd been faithfully with us at the practice, etc. And I didn't play them in the Oxford game. They sat on the bench, and I should have known this. I didn't realize that you actually had to participate in the game to get a letter. So those 2 fellows that had played the whole season did not get a letter. At the time, I wasn't conscious, I think, of the letter business, but we were close with Oxford. They were a much better skating team than we were, but we were struggling hard. And I think we were 0-0 at the end of the first period, 1-1 at the end of the second. And went into the third period, Oxford scored, so they were ahead 2-1, and we were battling to stay in the game and to catch up. And I just was worried if I had one really weak skater out there, that would be a breakthrough, and so didn't play them. And in fact, Oxford scored in the last minute or 2 and beat us 3-1. In retrospect, I should have been able to find a way to put those fellas in, at least to get some time in. And I guess what it taught me is, winning, yes, is important, and you're always putting your best team on the ice. But, if you're a smart coach, you'd find a way to put each of those fellas on. In other words, sort of seeing things whole and looking at their perspective as well as the victory for the team. And that's a regret I have about that. Sorry for the long story, but it took me a while to kind of understand that in my own head.
A great story. I think that's a really powerful story. I want to come back to that. In fact, for what do you feel most grateful?
Well, a number of things. One, I married Sharon, I was her first date when she was 13 in high school. So she's a woman who's had to show an awful lot of patience and tenacity over the years. She's been a wonderful mother, and I guess that would bring us to our 5 daughters. We're so lucky to have 5 great kids. All 5 are in public service positions, passionate about what they do, and 14 grandchildren. that's the cup runneth over, as we say.
Mhm. What has been the best year of your life so far, and why?
Well, I'd say this year, Mark. And if you'd asked me that question 10 years ago and 20 years ago, I would have said the same thing. And I hope we'll be sitting having a cup of coffee together in 10 years' time, and you'll ask me that question, and I'll give you the same answer this year. I'm a great reader of history. I love history. And as Vincent Massey said in his autobiography, what's past is prologue. History is important. It teaches us the way forward. But I'm very much a forward-thinking fellow, and I still get up in the morning and I can't wait for the day to start because there's so many good things to do. And I guess I look to today, tomorrow.
What's been the toughest year of your life so far, and why?
Maybe the one where I learned the most was in 1979. We as a family, our 5 daughters, Sharon and I, went from London, Ontario, where I'd been the law dean at Western, to become principal or president of McGill. And it was a really tough situation. In 79, there were, I think, for every one person going from West to Montreal, there were 100 people going east from say, Ontario to Montreal. There were 100 people going west. And at the university, as an English-speaking institution in a French-speaking province, with at that time a hostile government, it was a really, in a sense, tough. And the job was for McGill to continue to be a great Canadian, North American, world university in a context where English-speaking institutions were somewhat under siege. And that was a tough year in terms of maintaining the aspiration for excellence and the great esprit de corps at McGill when the surrounding environment was a challenging one. I tell one story about that. Con Harrington was the chancellor of the university that chaired the search committee that actually brought me and our family to Montreal. And he was, I guess, the great-grandson of Sir William Dawson, who was McGill's most important and most influential principal from about 1850 to about 1875, 1880. And we were pretty young. I think when my appointment was announced, I was 37 and Sharon was 36. And so being a younger couple, that in itself was a bit of a challenge in a very well-established community. And I guess 25 years later, Con had a stroke and was in hospital. He was late 70s at that time. And he was unconscious for about 4 weeks, I think. And I phoned his wife, Joan, regularly. And on one of these calls, she says, "We think the end is close. Con really just has a matter of a couple of days." And I said, "Well, is it okay if I come to say goodbye, Joan?" She said, "By all means." So I came over from Waterloo at the time and came to his hospital room at the Royal Victoria Hospital, and he was unconscious. And Joan came over and said to him, "Con, it's David who's here." And his eyes flickered a little bit for the first time in several weeks. And in a kind of whisper, he said, "So young." And it was interesting that somewhere in his brain, when he heard the name, he was conscious of having been responsible for bringing this really young couple into a challenging job, and all the risk that goes with it. But he was absolutely wonderful, as were so many people at McGill, to help us along and help us do the job as being a principal of McGill University.
Wow.
Tough year, and tough year, and Mark, maybe the most rewarding year in seeing how important other people were to help us and help the university along. And McGill was just such a wonderful experience from 1979 on, an extraordinary university that just seemed to get better in spite of any of the pressures from outside that could have been very difficult without such a tremendous community.
What a wonderful story. What one person would you say has had the greatest impact on your life?
Well, I guess in terms of moral compass, it would be Jesus. I'm a religious person. My religion, my faith is important to me. I think of other people, other heroes in the past. One that I learned so much about in the 7 years as Governor General, Mark, was Champlain, who Samuel Champlain, in all but name, was the first Governor General of Canada. In fact, for a period of time, he had the title of Governor of New France. And in my English history, I had a profound misunderstanding of Champlain, and I think in many ways a profound misunderstanding about Canada. I had seen him as a conquistador who came from France and brought the Catholic Christian religion and brought the flag and helped to take North America for France and sent back lots of fish and furs and so on as a kind of conquistador. Wrong. He was a 21st century person. He believed in the freedom of religion. He was born a Huguenot Protestant and had to convert to Catholicism to save his life. Had been part of a Spanish expedition as a young man and was just abhorrent about the colonial practices in Central and Southern America. Was a great believer in the rule of law. He learned a number of the First Nation languages, befriended all of the tribes that he met with, save for the Iroquois, but actually befriended them for a period of time, but because they were enemies of the others, it was difficult. And really believed in a very heterogeneous, inclusive set of communities in North America where people learned how to live together and build together. That was Champlain, so he would be one. I guess another historical hero for me would be Lincoln in the United States, who came to his office, without any of the usual attributes that people of wealth or aristocratic position had, self-learned, etc., and was involved in an extraordinarily difficult crisis, the challenge of slavery and its abolition, a civil war, and somehow managed through with his team of rivals that he brought together in a cabinet to see America through. And I think Lincoln is one of those figures who's towering and has many lessons for us.
What is the most important lesson that you would share with others?
I think it would be one, developing a sense of empathy, being kind to one another, being gentle on oneself, learning about our mutual dependence. You can do so much more when you do it together than when you try to do it alone. And I think the importance of trust, Mark, we wrote a book called Trust, because I think trust is both it's the glue that holds society together, and it's the grease, if I could use another metaphor, that permits things to move more smoothly, more easily. So that's a book we did a couple of years ago, and we're currently working on a book called Empathy, which for me is a very fundamental virtue as well. Empathy is not sympathy. Sympathy is I feel sorry for your plight. Empathy means I walk in your shoes. And for me, positive empathy is so key, and that is not only walking in your shoes, but helping you along in the journey and making the journey a better one.
What's the biggest factor that led you to where you are today?
I think learning from other people, those lessons of empathy and trust, and I guess trying to, lead a life where those are important things. And I guess in leadership positions, it would be recognizing your total dependence on the people around you, which sounds like a trite saying. You find a parade that's going in the right direction and you manage to maneuver your way up to the front of it, and all of a sudden you're a great leader because you're part of a great bandwagon that's going forward very well. I don't mean it that way. I mean that the leader's responsibility is to create an environment where each person in the group has a sense of purpose about what they're doing and can function to the very limit of their talents. And guess what? When you reach the limit of their talents in that kind of environment, those talents expand. So people really kind of expand and excel to meet the situation if you have an environment where that's encouraged and reinforced and people are pretty happy about what they're doing.
And we'll come back to some of your leadership lessons coming up, but what would people be most surprised to learn about you?
Well, I would say that I have a sense of humor, at least I think I do. My wife has a different opinion of that, and there's a story behind that, Mark. Sharon is very direct and very direct on the subject of her husband. So she was in an interview, this was in Waterloo, just a year or two before we came to Ottawa. And it was, I guess, the social column writer that was interviewing her, and she said the question to her was, how do you explain your husband's success? And Sharon says, would you repeat the question, please? And the reporter repeated, she says, I'm trying to struggle with what you mean by success. The reporter says, well, your husband's been a university president in 2 different institutions for 27 years. He must have done a few things right. Oh, she said that. She says, well, all you need to last as long as my husband as a university president is to be totally lacking in a sense of humor, and he's perfect for the job. And unfortunately, that's what got printed, Mark. So in spite of my white snouts, I really do believe I have a sense of humor. And I think that, humor is a wonderful balm that carries us along. And you can be serious and humorous at the same time.
Yeah. Balm as in BALM, although
that's it.
even if sometimes your jokes bomb.
Yes, they do.
Yeah.
more times than I'd like to account.
What's your secret? What is your secret talent?
Well, I think where I've been lucky would be judgment about people. And I think where I've made mistakes, it's probably been it's not making a good judgment or making a judgment too early on people. And so, again, it sounds like trite, but I've always prided myself on hiring or retaining people who are really talented. As a matter of fact, when I finished my 5 years as Dean of Law at Western, the members of the faculty and staff had a kind of a going away party, and it was quite a rambunctious evening. And late in the evening, the newest, most junior member of the faculty got up in a chair, and I guess I was started off by saying, I guess I'm saying goodbye, but I want to tell you to all in this room, I've always prided myself on hiring smarter people than myself, and that's why we've done so well. And the youngest guy got up in the chair, and he says, we don't take that as a compliment. But I joke about that, but I really do believe, Mark, that 1 + 1 adds up to 3 or 11, not just 2, when you can have people with a great sense of purpose and going in the same direction and really good about it. And so that's the team. Being able to put together that kind of team and choosing and celebrating the people who are part of it. If that's a talent, I hope it's a talent I have.
What's the most fun you've ever had?
Watching my wife in a public speaking role.
Okay, and what is the scariest thing you've ever done?
Watching my wife in a public speaking role.
Is there a story connected to that?
Well, there are many, Mark. I'm not quite sure which one to tell. Maybe this one. Sharon has a doctorate in rehabilitation medicine. She's a physiotherapist by background, but when she finished her doctorate, she says, I've had enough of being in the laboratory or the imaging machine. She was doing some work that involved brain imaging, and she could only get on the machine at 3 o'clock in the morning. No more 3 o'clock in the morning lab rat work for me. So she began writing. She writes historical fiction. So she's partway through the 3rd book in a trilogy, first about her grandmother, second about her mother, the third about our generation. But the 1st book was called Matrons and Madams. Her grandmother was a nurse in the UK, lost her husband in World War I, and came with Sharon's mom or daughter to Lethbridge, Alberta, to be the superintendent of the hospital. She was the matron. And there befriended actually a distant relative who'd been a teacher in Nova Scotia, came west where her husband was working in the coal mines in Lethbridge. He died in an industrial accident. And she found herself with her own child to raise, and her teaching credentials weren't recognized. And to make a living, she actually ran a brothel in Lethbridge. So she was the madam, and the title of the book is Matrons and Madams. So at one of the book launches, Sharon was reading from her book and then questions, and our then 8-year-old grandson, Nick, was in the crowd, and he got up and put a question, said, "Could you please explain the title of the book?" And my wife paused for a moment and smiled, and she says, "Well, that's a very straightforward question, simple. So I'll ask my chauffeur at the back of the room to answer it." Well, her chauffeur was yours truly. I was Governor General, so I stood up and said, "Yes, I am the chauffeur. I'm also the husband of the author. And I will explain the first part of the title, the matron, to the author's grandchild, Nicholas, who just asked that, if she'd be prepared to explain the second half of the title, and she did not explain the second half of the title."
Great story. So what is your boldest prediction for the future?
I guess it would be about Canada and our place in the world. And my prediction and my hope would be that people around the world would regard this as a special country, a country that is smart and caring. The title of my installation address as Governor General in 2010 was a smart and caring nation, a call to service. And both those adjectives are important, and I think they're very much embedded in who we are as Canadians. We believe in equality of opportunity, particularly in education. That's the smart part. And the caring part is that we really function as a collectivity. Individualism is important, but not overriding importance. And our success, I think, just in being able to live in a climate which from time to time is harsh, and certainly through our history has been sparsely populated and very large, has been looking after one another. And I hope that continues to be not only a fundamental value, but something that we build on. And I think both are tested through this pandemic, how well we function both as smart and caring, and have to kind of innovate and reinvent ourselves every day to meet new circumstances.
You've spoken many times to students, high school students, elementary students, university students. If you could give one commencement address and it had one message in it, what would that message be?
Probably would be kind to one another and be gentle on yourself. I've given numbers of these, and sometimes that's a theme. There are other themes as well, but I think that notion of moving from me to we, from the first person singular to the first person plural, is important. That you are not the center of the universe, and when you begin to include in your universe people other than yourselves, a great load falls from your shoulders, and life becomes, I think, even more interesting. But at the same time, it's important that each young person has confidence in themselves and a sense of self-worth. And with that in hand, of course, you become an even better neighbor looking after others.
You've written many books. You have read many, many books. Your grandchildren call you Grandpa Book. Is there one book that you are most likely to recommend to other people, other than the ones you've written, of course?
Yeah, the grandchildren call it Grandpa Book because I love to read to them. It goes back with my own children. I guess we were through all the Narnia stories 5 times, and I loved those opportunities of reading to and with my children, now with the grandchildren. I guess many favorite books, Mark. Any one of James Michener's 60 or so books would be ones I'd recommend, mostly historical fiction. I guess another series that I'm reading again, I've reached the age where I read books for a second time, is Will and Ariel Durant's History of Civilization, largely finished by about 1950, I think, but it's 11 or 12 volumes, and I've now been through it 2 times. I first began reading it when I was, I guess, a college student, and then picked it up again 25 or 30 years later and worked through volume after volume. I've got another one of those volumes that I keep fairly close by and pick up every now and then. So that's the 3rd time through. And you say, well, why would you read a book a second time? Well, I guess you forgot what you read the first time, but lessons of history, especially interpreted in the extraordinarily eloquent and skillful way that Will and Ariel Durant show in their writing, that you're learning all the time. And I guess that's the reason I read. I just find it's so much of a learning experience. And I tend to read for new ideas. So I have a fairly broad spectrum of reading, and it's kind of learn something new that jolts me out of my complacency and gets me even more curious.
How much time do you spend reading, by the way?
Not sure what I'd say in hours. I think it's fair to say I read something other than work papers every day. I had a wonderful doctor at McGill. He used to come to my office just to see me because he said, when I take your blood pressure, I don't want you to be reacting to the hospital, etc. And he said, you're such an idiot, And I said, Ken, you're my doctor. I know many people in the university call me that, but I don't expect that from my doctor. And he says, well, you have trouble sleeping at night because you can't turn your mind off. You have a very active mind. He says, I don't want you working until, 10 or 11 o'clock at night. You stop at 8:30 or 9 o'clock and just read trash, just read to put your mind to work. So I actually read every night before I go to sleep, typically for an hour or so. And it could be serious stuff, or it could be, a detective novel. I think I've read all of Louise Penny's detective novels set in the eastern townships of Quebec and things like that are great fun.
All right, David, thank you for answering all of those questions. In just a moment, we will start digging deep with David Johnston. We're just going to take a quick break so I can tell you a little bit more about the presenting sponsor of Digging Deep, ZenBooks. ZenBooks is Canada's go-to cloud accounting firm. They are not your typical accounting firm. I know the founders, Colin and Eric. I've worked with them for several years. And here's why I think you should consider working with them too. First of all, they bring a fresh, unique, modern approach to what is a very old-fashioned industry. These guys were working remotely and in the cloud long before it became cool. ZenBooks also uses technology to your advantage. I think this is really important. They give you the tools and analysis you need to monitor your business in real time. That's so valuable right now when everything changes so quickly. Yes, they're a virtual accounting firm, but that doesn't mean they're offshore, and it doesn't mean they're inattentive. ZenBooks combines the efficiency and effectiveness of a cloud accounting service with all the benefits that you'd want from a trusted advisor, high-level advice, and strategic support. Now, here's what I think is going to happen if you work with ZenBooks. You'll probably start out taking advantage of their cutting-edge cloud accounting solutions, but in the long run, I think you'll stay with them because of their strategic guidance and problem solving. Among their core values, they specifically list being candid and proactive. Isn't that exactly what you want from a trusted advisor? Look, even if you're already working with an accountant or a bookkeeper, or you have some accounting staff on your team, I think you should still talk to ZenBooks and learn more about their tools and their expertise. Check out ZenBooks at zenbooks.ca. That's zenbooks.ca. David, once again, thank you so much for sharing your time with me today. I really appreciate it. And we have a lot to talk about. I want to hear so much more about some of the stories you've told already and the lessons you have to share with others from your incredible life and your wonderful experiences. But the one place I want to start is I want to know the story about Eric Siegel and this character in his very popular book, Love Story, which of course became a movie. There was a character in that book named Davy Johnston, who was a hockey player at Harvard. And you were Davy Johnston, who was the captain of the Harvard hockey team. So that character was actually based on you. What's the story behind that?
Well, that was the characterization by Eric Siegel, Mark. Eric was a professor of classics who actually lived across us in the residence or the college where we were at Harvard. In those years, the single professors often lived in the college because some of the teaching was done there. And he also wrote screenplays, off-Broadway shows, etc. And was had been a track member of the track team when he was a student at Harvard about 10 years before we met him. So he would be mid-30s. But he took a real interest in young people and my two roommates one was a baseball player, the other was a basketball player. So we loved sports, and he would choose us to go running at 6:30 in the morning with him along the Charles River. We take turns doing that. So we got to know him, and you're a little flattered when a professor was interested in you. What I didn't realize is he would create these novels out of people around him, and Love Story was about a Boston Brahmin, wealthy young guy who played on the Harvard hockey team and fell in love with a Italian Catholic gal from Rhode Island, from a very poor family. They married, and she contracted leukemia and died. That actually was a true story. And the Harvard hockey player, played by Ryan O'Neal in the movie, actually lived the floor below us. His name was Adam Winthrop, and Governor Winthrop was the first governor of the New England colony back in 1620, so he had quite a lineage. But he brought in other characters, and he changed their name, but for some reason he didn't change my name, so he kept my name in the book, and that was that. And he has portrays us as being a very good team, but having lost a game to Cornell for the championship, and he actually has me in tears, which is quite wrong, and I was greatly offended by the whole thing, but nevertheless, we remained good friends. So that was Love Story.
Yeah. And I understand that some of the characters in the book were based on Al Gore, the former U.S. vice president, and Tommy Lee Jones, the actor, as well. Did you cross paths with them?
Tommy Lee Jones was a classmate, although I didn't know him at the time. He later became, a great popular star. And I just don't know that history. Al Gore was a couple of years earlier. And in fact, may have appeared in guys that I didn't know. Some of the hockey players were actually players on the team, and I could see their characteristics. But Eric wrote another book called The Class, and that was based on his own class. And again, he picked up characters who were actually classmates, changed their names, but the characteristics remained the same. So I just don't have any intelligence on Al Gore and Tommy Lee Jones with respect to Love Story itself.
When I asked you about your fondest childhood memory, you talked about the story of Mr. Taylor buying you a new pair of skates when you were 14, and you went out and scored 3 goals. And it was the first time after a lifetime of hand-me-downs that you had new equipment. Why do you think he did that? And what do you take away from that moment?
Well, first of all, he was just a very good man. As I later learned, he had a son himself who was a bit younger. And he just had an affinity for young people and helping them. And I came from very modest circumstances, and I think he knew those circumstances. So it was kind of a gesture of kind of reaching out and helping someone. I think it was also very typical of the community of Sault Ste. Marie in which I grew up, Mark, where maybe it's particularly pronounced in northern communities, especially those whose economies are based on resources, which have a high degree of cyclicality. So we had ups and downs in our community, and there was a great sense of helping one another. And Mr. Taylor, I think, epitomized that. But his story is duplicated many, many times over. There were so many Mr. Taylors in my life that it would be, I could go on forever. In fact, when I gave my installation address to Smart and Caring Nation, a call to service, I said, if you remember only 3 words of what I say today, they are cherish our teachers, because apart from our parents, they're the people that have the most influence on our life and the paths we take. And I said, if we had 2 or 3 days together in this chamber, I tell you 100 stories of teachers, mentors, coaches, etc., that have influenced my life, I think, for the better. And that was Sault Ste. Marie. I played on 3 different sporting teams, football, baseball, and hockey, all of which won provincial championships. And they were United Nations. The hockey team on which I played for 17 and under, Phil and Tony Esposito and Lou Nanny were the stars. Tony was the backup goaltender at age 14 on a 17 and under team. People say, well, backup goaltender Tony, well, at 14, he was playing at the level of 17-year-olds for a provincial championship. But almost all of the players in that team were Italian Canadians heritage from the west end of the city, and I grew up in the east end of the city, and I was on a line with the two other Anglo-Saxon names on the team, Lynn Erdman and Fraser Ryan, Anglo-Saxon names like Johnston. They called us the spaghetti line, and I took that as a great compliment that it meant I was now a member of the Italian-Canadian community. So, the whole notion of cultural heritage and that kind of thing was sport overcame any particular barriers. And one of the stories I tell in the book, The Idea of Canada, was I joined a fraternity, or final club as we call them, at Harvard, and then a couple of months in realized that there were no blacks there. We only had, I think, 7 Afro-Americans in our class of 2000 in those days, 1959. But one was proposed for membership, and there was a vote taken, and it only required, I think, 3 or 4 negative votes, but the result came out negative, and I was absolutely shocked by it. And the explanation was, we're all in favor of no barriers, but the alumni who support, would not be, and we just have to work with that and get over it. And so I resigned from the club, and it was considered a terrible decision by me of going against the grain. But I said, I'm not here to crusade. I grew up in a little town in Sault Ste. Marie, and it's just not part of my sort of radar screen to have this kind of barrier discrimination. And I'm not trying to preach to you. I'm not trying to say you're wrong, but I'm just not comfortable. As I say, at that time, this was prior to the civil rights movement, that was a decision that had its negative consequences in many respects for me, but it was who I was from Sault Ste. Marie. And, those values were my values, and those were important ones to me. And that's what my community taught me. And I like to think that those values have served me through my life.
Yeah, and I think in addition to those values, there's something about you. You have this sort of inherent and enduring kindness and thoughtfulness about you. Where do you think that arose from? Where did those values come from, and where did your disposition come from? Is that something you picked up from others? Is it learned behavior? Tell me a little more about that.
Well, it's interesting, Mark. We're writing this book on empathy. I call it Empathy, the Heart of the Nation, because I believe it's such an important virtue. And it's caused me to go back and ask, if you are an empathetic person, where did that come from? It didn't come sort of kind of by birth, I think. In fact, we quote that wonderful song from James Michener's South Pacific, made into a musical. Mary Martin sings a song that I translate: you've got to be taught to love or to hate. You've got to be taught before it's too late. You've got to be carefully taught. I think you learn how to love, or alas, in some cases, learn to hate. And I think I learned love or empathy or consideration for others through the kindness of strangers, through the Mr. Taylors of the world, through the Don Ropes of the world, the many, many people who were kind and helped me along. And it just seemed to me to be an awfully good way to lead your life. And I came from a very modest background. I think my first job was at age 8, because I knew if I needed a new pair of blue jeans or a bike, you go and earn the money for it. But that was not a hardship. I just had such terrific experiences working, part-time and then full-time during the summer, etc. Always had a job through university, law school, etc. And played every sport you can imagine. Was able to do that. And I suppose you would say I was tough, in the sense that I was a tough competitor in sport, and pushed myself hard. I think that was good. But I like to think that you can be both tough in the sense of being disciplined and tenacious, but also kind and thoughtful and being civilized and respectful and caring about people. And that those aren't mutual contradictions, that they are values or characteristics that can live very comfortably one with the other.
You also are very productive, and you have obviously a great deal of energy. Tell me about how you've been able to sustain that throughout your life, and any tips or tricks you can share about about just how much you've been able to get done in your life.
Well, I think having a passion for involvement, first, curiosity is really important, a curious mind, and then secondly, a passion for making things better. That's innovation, and seeing the results of making those things better. For me, those are wonderfully satisfying things. And I often speak about, can we have equality of opportunity and excellence too? And I believe they're mutually reinforcing. If you provide equality of opportunity, you create a larger base of talent from which excellence can emerge. And then you try to establish an environment which is competitive, of constantly striving to do your best. I think sports taught me that, but we established an award when I was Governor General, Mark, for the academic all-Canadian athletes. These are young men or women who play on a varsity team for their university in Canada and are also Dean's Honor List. So they're people who are excellent both in the playing field and also in the classroom. And as I often say to parents who talk about their children and motivation, try to find one thing about which your child is passionate and strives to be really good at, to do better. That's striving for excellence. And you find those are translatable. If you experience the wonderful elixir of excellence and satisfaction of doing something well and getting it done in one sphere, it translates to others. So these academic Canadians would be, I call, two-legged people, because they learned excellence in two spheres. And when I was at Waterloo and also at McGill, we established a President's Trophy for the men's team and the women's team that best exemplified the academic all-Canadian qualities. And our registrar would do the grade point average of the students on each team to determine academic excellence. And guess what? The grade point averages were better in the playing term than in the non-playing term. So these were people who learned how to use their time very purposefully. And what was so wonderful, but not surprising to me, is when we created the Governor General's Award. So a letter goes out that I would sign and add personal note to about 3,500 young people across the country each year who were academic all-Canadians in their own university. And it gave me such joy to write those letters. And then 8 of them would represent the entire cohort for a ceremony at Rideau Hall. And I'd read their CVs, and not only would they show excellence in sport and excellence in the classroom, they were also heavily involved in volunteer activities, but not just as a member. They would be leading the team because they had learned how to get groups of people working together. And I suppose I've been lucky in my life in being exposed to people who've been kind of three-legged people, of being able to put those things together and be very productive and be very conscious of being productive and measuring impact, and don't sort of waste your time just whistling in the dark.
You mentioned a story earlier about what happened at Cambridge with the players who didn't get their letter. Do you think there is a lesson in that for all of us, in that sometimes we can be caught in the moment and focused on an immediate goal and fail to see the bigger picture sometimes?
Sure. Yeah. E.B. White writes those wonderful children's books, Charlotte Webb and Stuart Little, etc. And he speaks about seeing things whole. It's the broader perspective. And, in that game, I should have known as the captain, as the playing coach, that this was the convention at Cambridge, that you had to play in that game to get a letter. And I hadn't informed myself. But also to figure out a way that you could accomplish both things. Roger Martin writes a book about the integrated mind. He says, people that are good business leaders in his book are able to keep 2 or more conflicting ideas together in their head at the same time. Well, that's part of a lot of decisions we make. Very often you're making decisions that are not the best, but they're the least worst alternative. And you've got 3 or 4 or 7 different factors that go into making that decision. But you want to be sure that you're seeing things whole. You're seeing all of the relevant ones. And seeing things whole usually means a long-term perspective and not simply the short-term perspective. And I think the best way to be sure that you see things whole, Mark, is to continue to be always curious, always learning, and be very careful that you don't get too wrapped up in your own importance and your own arrogance. One way of doing that is not simply reading broadly to enhance your curiosity, but surrounding yourself with independent thinkers, especially in a crisis with a business leader. There's a tendency to kind of circle the wagons and hunker down and look on the very immediate things. And often people are a little hesitant to kind of speak out. That's wrong. What you want to do is be sure you've got a stream of independent thinking, so that you are considering all the features that make things whole. And I think those virtues that I spoke about earlier, empathy and trust, are part of seeing things whole.
How did you learn to be an effective leader? Because you came through the ranks of academia, and sometimes in those organizations there isn't a lot of focus. It's often the person who has excelled academically who gets the leadership role, even if they don't have experience or training as a leader. So how did you learn to be an effective leader?
Well, my wife would say the jury is still out on the effective part, Mark. And maybe she'd also say you keep your sense of humor. I think learning from others, if you're lucky in life, as I have been, you're just exposed to people who for some reason you're drawn to, and you say, what's special about that person? And it, for me, would be, gee, they seem to be very purposeful in their own life. There's a sense of joy in their own life. And guess what? Other people come to them sort of like being attracted to a magnet because they believe in what they're doing. So I think I've learned from others. I just did a letter to a man who's 89 years old, Angelo Bombacco in Sault Ste. Marie. Angelo was a leader in the Italian community in Sault Ste. Marie in hockey. And at about age 25, he began to be a manager of minor league systems, and was the manager of a team called Algoma Contractors. And we won the Ontario Provincial Championship for 17 under in 1958, I guess 1959. And he, in my letter to him, just reminiscing on him being such an important factor in my life, said, Angelo, I think you hold the Guinness record for best man at weddings of young men who played for you, and being godparent to their first child. He was a great gatherer and promoter of hockey talent, but he was a great human being. That was a team where our three stars were Phil and Tony Esposito and Lou Nanne, who went on to play with Minnesota, and Phil and Tony know. But Tony was 14 on a 17 and under team, and he was sort of the backup goaltender. And people say Tony Esposito backup goaltender, but he was 14. And Angelo, saw Tony as special at 14, so he was on the team and playing. And I guess I just learned a lot from people like that. They, one, were passionate about what they did. Two, they were successful. And three, they were so inclusive. I came from the east end of town. The west end of town was largely Italian and immigrant, close to the steel company. And that team was about 80% Italian Canadians and great athletes. And the line I played on was Charlie Frayne and Lyd Erdman and myself, Johnston, and all Anglo-Saxon names. They called us the spaghetti line on that team of largely Italians. But, the lesson from that, again, was growing up in Sault Ste. Marie, where, golly, it was a United Nations, and you were so oblivious to what the last name of the person was, or, what their cultural heritage were, and you were really conscious of, whether they could block and tackle or pass a puck or tip one in. It was really colorblind, ethnic blind, and really given to teams working together.
That's a really powerful story, and it was unusual at that time, obviously, to have that kind of diversity and to have that be a strength of the team. You talk a lot about people, and one of the very first things I noticed about you when I interviewed you, I think for the first time after you had become Governor General, is how much you took care to notice everybody in the room. It was a television interview, so you talked to the camera person, the producer, the audio person. You remembered all their names at the end of the interview. Where did you learn that? Is that something that comes naturally to you, or did you learn to be so kind and generous to other people?
Well, you're flattering, Mark, and that's kind of you. I think first of all, I just have a natural interest in people. It's a curiosity. And for me, curiosity is the most important talent of all. Sort of asking the why and keeping a very open mind. Minds like parachutes work best when open. And you learn so much, when you just get beyond the name of another person. That's point one. Point two is uh, people function better if they're not a number, but they're actually an individual. And so, there's a television crew. Each person has a role, and it's appropriate, I think, to salute them and then thank them at the end of it. But even more mechanically, I'm a teacher, and when I became dean of law school at Western, those were the days when you still could have composite pictures of the entering class. You'd get photographs with the acceptance of the admission. So we had 150 in the entering class, and 15 days before registration day, I'd sit down with 10 files a day, and I'd get the name and the photograph and maybe one feature of that particular individual, so that when I saw that individual on the first day and I would ask for the privilege of being the first person to meet the entering class, I'd be able to say, hey, Mark, welcome. You're from Montreal. Nice to have you here. And of course, you'd be terrified. Gosh, the dean has already got my name in his black book and watching every move. But it was to indicate to you and to the others that you're human beings, and we're entering into a great learning experience together, and you're embarking upon a professional life in a noble profession. And am I ever lucky to have, you as my kind of comrades, and I want you to feel that way. And somehow the tone of the school was, pretty good when you had that sense of each of us is important in this organization, and each of us is a person, not just a name or a number.
I want to talk a little bit about your childhood, because you began working at a very young age. Tell me about that. I understand you started working at around 9 or 10 years of age, and you had jobs from that point forward as you were going to school. So what did you do, and what did you learn from those experiences?
Just I learned a ton and had a whole lot of fun as well, Mark. My family was quite modest. My father had a small business that alas didn't succeed, so he was unemployed for a considerable period of time, and income in our home was important. My mom worked as a nurse's aide on the night shift at the hospital, and then lost her eyesight, so that source of revenue disappeared. And so I recognized from an early age that if I wanted a bike or a new pair of blue jeans, there was a way to get it. It was to have a job and to earn enough money to do it. And I never had any hardship. I always had a part-time job from age, I guess, 9 on, and then all through the summers. But those jobs were unbelievably good because from about 11 on, I worked in a garage, beginning with sweeping floors and fetching coffee and washing cars. But then very quickly moved into other kind of value-add things. First of all, I began moving the cars in and around the garage so the mechanics didn't. And then at age 12, I actually would take them and park them on the street. And it just shows Sault Ste. Marie. I'd always look carefully to see if the policemen on the beat were coming around the corner or not, and seemed to manage to escape that. But one day, I was getting up the car that I just parked. A large policeman appeared, and I thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to go to jail. He put his arm on my shoulder. He says, son, he said, we know about your driving habits. Don't embarrass us, please. We're at this point of our beat on the hour and on the half hour. Don't be out parking cars at that time. And he said, keep well. And the way he went, that was Sault Ste. Marie. That was the kindness of that policeman. We worked on piece rates, so the faster that the mechanics could do a job, the more they got paid. So my job became to sit down with them beside their bench and take a list of all the parts they'd need to repair a car, rather than them writing that out and them going to the parts department and them waiting for the parts manager to be free and then filling a basket and bringing them back. I did that, and the parts manager taught me how to find the parts, and so I would select and put them in the basket. bring them back out and save, 10% of the mechanic's time. Did the same thing by warranty claims. The secretary taught me how to type warranty claims, and we could get them out at the end of the day rather than the next day. And my job was to get the warranty claims and parts orders up to the station by the time the 9:30 train left for Toronto, and we get the warranty claim checked back a day early, and we get the parts that we'd reordered back a day earlier, and I earned my 60 cents an hour that way. And if I were practicing football or student council meetings till 6 o'clock when the garage closed, I had a key, and I'd come and do my work after 6 and get up to the station. That was the kindness all the way through high school of where I worked, and it was just terrific.
So we should talk a little bit about how you ended up at Harvard and how much that changed your life, because that is, I think, the result of hard work. But I'm sure you've mentioned the word luck so many times already. You would attribute that as being a fortunate moment in your life. How did that happen, and what did it do for your future?
Well, it was great people. And in fact, affirmative action is now under some siege in the United States for different reasons based on race, etc. But I'm a Bill Durham fellow. He was the dean of admissions at Harvard College before the United States entered World War II, went off in the Marines and came back. And day one went to see President Conant and said, "Mr. President, I have news for you. Your university has performed brilliantly in the war through its professional schools, engineering, law, business, medicine, etc. But you've got a problem in the college. They're all men. The women are over at Radcliffe College and separated from other men, so they haven't grown up with women. Number two, they're almost all sons and grandsons of very wealthy New England businessmen. They've gone to private schools. They've had no experience leading people who come from different backgrounds and have more difficulty seeing the talent in different backgrounds. You have to open up this institution to the public high schools of the country." And the president said, "Right, come with me Monday night. I'm meeting the most influential benefactors of Harvard University, and I want you to explain to them why they should raise large sums of money to recruit kids from public high schools and reduce the chances of their sons and grandsons getting into the place to 1/3. And they did. And so it was an alumnus in Minneapolis that contacted my high school looking for good scholar athletes. And our principal just put the letter in the wastebasket. And then after a couple of years, he found an alumnus in Sault Ste. Marie who was a scientist at the insect laboratory. I babysat for them at the time. He gave me the letter. So as a grade 10, I began corresponding with this alumnus, and then was accepted at Harvard. Harvard doesn't have athletic scholarships. It was an academic scholarship, but about 70% of our students, many of them now coming from public high schools, thanks to this recruiting effort, were on financial support or scholarship support. The interesting story is the principal of our high school, who was a very good man and a good teacher, wouldn't write my letter of reference for me because he said, "I don't want you going to a third-rate American university." I said, "Sir, I'm sure there are some third-rate ones, but I think you know that this one is first-rate." And he says, "Well, if you go there, you'll stay in the United States and you'll be lost." I said, "I don't think so, sir. I think I will come back to Canada. But, with all respect, sir, isn't that my choice?" He said, "No, that's my choice." She was asking me for the letter, and so he didn't write it. So I went down the hall to the history teacher, who was also the football coach. He says, "I'll write the letter for you." He said, "You've been a big frog in a really small pond. You've got to get your head knocked off by people that are faster, meaner, tougher than you are." And I was in, and they were faster, tougher, and meaner. And it was just a terrific experience. I had been a good student, but Harvard just was marvelous. I worked really hard, and I worked really hard to be a good athlete and to be a good student. And I graduated magna cum laude, which for me was a triumph of entering that tough arena and learning to get your head knocked off and getting picked up and working a little smarter as a consequence. And that really led me into university life, I think, and believing so much in the importance of education. It was the Harvard experience and the notion of equality of opportunity to ensure that everyone in your society has the opportunity to grow their talents to the very limit.
And you
That's
came
why
back
I
to
think,
Canada and proved that your principle wrong, right?
yeah, and I went from Harvard. I went to the UK, Mark, to study law to Cambridge, and again, it was, I guess, the football coach's notion of expose yourself to the toughest competition you can find, and guess what? You'll grow from it. And I was looking at possibly playing professional hockey out of Harvard, and concluded in those days the 6-team NHL chances were not strong, and so went to England partly because I wanted to see life from another country, from a really very good university, but partly I didn't want to be staying at Harvard for law school or up to McGill or Toronto, because I'd be, in the arena, Boston Gardens on a Sunday night saying, gee, I could be out there. So I went to England. It was great. And I came back then to finish law in Canada, and then became a prof and a university manager. And I was a much better university manager from having studied outside my own country and studied at two of the really great institutions in the world, where you do have a sense of what excellence is and how you work at it.
So that experience obviously changed your life, but it's unfortunately not an experience that everyone has access to. What do you think we can and should do to make education and that quality of education available to more people? Because it is life-changing, isn't it?
We reinforce curiosity. We encourage everyone in our country to say that education is just in front of us, and seize the opportunities that we can, make it as accessible and as affordable as we possibly can. And various forms of education, Mark, not simply university education, good trades and so on. These are vital and important. Each of them has a contribution to make. But the other thing I would think is so important is developing our people to be global citizens. My children and grandchildren are now all global citizens. Our daughters, 5 of them, began international exchanges at age 12. And I watched 4 things that developed in them. Number 1, they became more curious, asking more intelligent why questions. Number 2, they became more tolerant, not just in, you're different from me. That's okay, nobody gets hurt, but what makes that difference and what lies behind it? Thirdly, their judgment became better. They were quick to spot bigotry. They wanted to hear the other side of the story before they came to a judgment. They wanted the other point of view, but fourthly, they became more empathetic. And that, I think, is really important to reduce conflict and to develop a sense of a search for peace amongst nations. And if any country can do it, it's Canada, because we, more than most countries, allow people to maintain their heritage as a richness. And we can speak more languages than any other nation in the world. And people, with that skill can go from Canada anywhere. That really should be Canada as the Athens to the new Romes around the world, of having that, I'm proud of my own country and I want to make it better, smarter, more caring. But I'm also very much aware of the world and a global citizen. That's what I would love to see in our education system.
Now, I've described you already as being so kind and generous to people, and you have a very gentle way about you as well. But obviously, for you to have accomplished what you have accomplished in your life, you have to have had ambition and tenacity and perseverance. And I've heard other people and read other people describe you in those terms. So how do you strike the balance, and what do you think are the characteristics that have helped you be successful and achieve a balance between pursuing the things that matter to you while still being accommodating, kind, generous, and respectful to the people around you?
Well, I think it comes to your values, Mark, and certainly respect for others. For me, is a very, very fundamental value, and I think it really comes out of each of us is an important entity, and each of us has a dignity, and it's the incumbent on each of us to focus that dignity of others and permit it to flourish, etc. That's just an innate thing. That said, we live in a competitive world. We know that hard work is important. We know that being strategically wise is important. I think you develop that side of your personality, but I don't see those as clashing things. I don't see them as a teeter-totter. You're kind of, a hard-nosed competitor on the one hand, and you're a gentle, kind soul on the other hand. I see it really as a kind of synchronized gear where you can actually have both of those inputs, and they don't cause the gear to collapse, but to function in a smoother way. Very often the way you win in a situation is not by being tougher or being more forceful, but it's being more persuasive. And that in itself becomes a wonderful winning force when you persuade other people that this is the right way to go. And I think the way you embark upon that persuading others is to walk in their shoes and see what their interests are. And then all of a sudden, with that understanding, you look for the middle ground. I guess many of the successful things I've been involved in have been kind of the round table concept where you have a particular objective and I have a particular objective. And when we first state them, they're somewhat conflicting. And then we get inside them, and all of a sudden we see some intersecting areas, and we identify those intersecting areas and say, okay, if instead of me doing this in this way, I do it that way, and you make some alteration, all of a sudden we have a winning combination. One of the really interesting things I did is I chaired a national roundtable on the environment and the economy. And it was 1989, Prime Minister Mulroney created it for sustainable development. And it was 24 people, 16 people, 4 from government ministers, Minister Wilson, Minister Bouchard, Minister Andre, and 3 people from CEOs of major Canadian companies, and 3 people from the environmental movement, 4, I should say, and then 4 from backgrounds like mine, academic and so on. And it took us 2 or 3 meetings before, the business people could move over into the environmental side and environmentalists, but we were identifying those concentric circles, and it was wonderfully successful because of that ability to see things whole and to mutually educate one another. And I just find that concept of seeing things whole and the round table notion works so often in situations that do have a degree of tension in life. And it's not about being tough, or it's not even being kinder, but it's being just sensible.
But it takes a certain confidence and security to kind of let go and allow yourself to participate in a process like that and not know where it's going to lead. And I know earlier you said leadership is recognizing that you have a total dependence on others. It sounds to me like you're saying that that while a lot of people look at leadership as having the answers and telling other people what to do, that it's actually in many ways the opposite of that.
Yeah, I'm a great believer in the leader as servant notion, the leader as servant, that you're serving a cause, serving a purpose. I often say about the universities, the cause and the company are very good. The cause is very, very altruistic, helping people learn and enhancing the knowledge and talent base of your country. And the company's great. Here I am, a tenured university law professor, and the students that come to my classes are so bright that even I can't confuse them. They're terrific young people. And, the whole community is one of learning, etc. So I think you begin with the fact that you're learning all the time, and you're not the person that has all the answers. Number 2, you can accomplish so many things if you insist on never taking any credit for them, but the credit is the team, it's the other people on the team. And when there is faults, when something goes wrong, that you as leader take responsibility for that. Not, it's all my fault, but I'm leading this team. This has gone wrong, so I'm up here to say we messed up, and we're gonna fix it. And thirdly, sure, you're gonna have losses along the way. You enter into trying to promote sustainable development in Canada in 1989, and you're not quite sure where you're going to end up, and how climate change monitors and indices are changing. But together you figure out where you are, what is the reality, where you think we should be going, and then how the heck you get there. And along those processes, I think you get some pretty good wisdom. I just should say on wisdom, I love these homely metaphors. We say in this digital age that The trick is to move from data to information to knowledge, and if you're really lucky, to wisdom. And people say, what's the difference between knowledge and wisdom? Well, knowledge is knowing that a tomato is a fruit. Wisdom is knowing that you don't put a tomato in a fruit salad. Now, that's a little bit of kind of homely wisdom. And I think that kind of homely wisdom works pretty well when you're bringing people together and you're not just focused on the greatest theory or the greatest model, but what in your experience has worked and how can we make it work in our current context?
Great points. Now, I wanted to talk about how you work a little bit, because you're still very busy today. As you mentioned, you're working on another book. And I know you maintained an exhausting workload when you were the Governor General, and your other jobs in the past as university president were very demanding. So how do you go about your work? How do you prioritize? How do you choose what you're working on?
Well, number one, it's great teams, Mark. It comes back to that theme we've touched on probably a dozen times today, haven't we? It's teams of people in collaboration. And I really, really have been lucky in the teams I've been associated with. And then it's the name in the front of the sweater, not the name in the back of the sweater, that's key. And you also delegate an awful lot. When I was at Waterloo, and certainly during the later years at McGill, I spent 2/3, sometimes 3/4 of my time outside the university, not inside. And I could do that because, it was so decentralized. I didn't have to be hovering over every department meeting or faculty meeting. We had terrific provosts, great 3 or 4 vice presidents, 6 great deans, chairs of departments that had control over their budgets to make the decisions that they wanted. And so we had a relatively low administrative overhead. And I think my colleagues said I can do more to help the university externally than I can hovering around. And we did. I used to do a pie chart of my time, and I'd have the executive committee review it retrospectively and prospectively each year and say, you own my time, and the university does. I want you to be satisfied that I'm spending it appropriately. And I almost always was chairing some kind of public inquiry or task force. I guess it's the kind of thing that you're interested in doing, you do, and you're asked to do it. But that, to me, was a part of the university at the service of the province or the service of the nation. I think you also, the old maxim that if you want to get something done, ask a busy person. There's a reason for that, because busy people have learned how to prioritize, how to focus on the things they can do and avoid the things they can't, and to use their time very, very effectively. So, I would operate on the principle of manage, don't do. Try to see that the work was being done, that deadlines were being met, that quality was being met. And another of my strange habits, I'm a letter writer. I believe in personal notes. And when I was in meetings, chairing meetings, I was always signing letters. There'd be letters to all of the donors to the university, or congratulatory letters to thus and so. And the deans would be sitting there watching me, and I could follow all the conversation, etc. But I wanted them to understand that, being in contact with your alumni, with your students, is an important part of your job. And I can do it. And I'm doing it right here as we're, proceeding through a committee meeting. Those were, to me, important lessons. Just one other I'd pass on, Mark. When I came to Rideau Hall on day 2, my desk was sky high with files, each of which had a letter or order of council to sign, and then had a covering memo. And the covering memo had 5 or 6 signatures on it. And I said, why 5 or 6? Well, one person drafted it, and then it went through 3 or 4 letters of supervision, of translation, etc., to be checked off, and finally came to me for signature. And that took some time. I'm not a believer in edicts, but we developed this policy quite quickly, which was the 1/1 rule. One person drafting the letter, one person signing it, me, and no one in between. And in one day, that is a 24-hour turnaround on 95% or more of the letters that came in, or orders of council. And that sounds draconian, eh? You're saying to that one person that you no longer have the refuge of 3 or 4 people checking your work. Au contraire, that first person all of a sudden became responsible for that letter with the pride of it. And if it was a letter or an order in council that they were a little bit concerned about. They hadn't done this before. It was a difficult area, really difficult. Okay, let's set that aside. That takes a little more study. Need some clarification. Go to one of those people that otherwise supervise, get their advice, incorporate it, and then do it. And guess what happened? The productivity, in quotes, just leapt enormously. We had these turnarounds that were terrific. The work was less because there were less people that had to be involved in it. And most important of all, that first person drafting the letter was proud of what they were doing. And they knew that, I'd signed 50,000 letters or orders in council a year. And as I'd explained to them, I don't read everything word by word that you give me. I have much confidence that you will give me something I can sign. Tremendous esprit de corps. So the Rideau Hall office, led by Stephen Wallace, went from we were somewhat challenged when we arrived in 2010. There had been quite a few changes and so on, becoming the employer of choice in the government of Canada in Stephen's last year. And it was all that kind of esprit de corps and really trusting in each person to do their job and ensuring that each person was pretty excited about the job.
It's about giving them ownership and accountability too, right?
Yeah,
Instead of
that's it.
if there's a group dynamic, then nobody kind of owns the final product, and it might not
That's
be
it.
as good, right?
That's it. And with the positive interpretations to those words, ownership, and I'm proud of what I'm doing. Accountable, of course I'm accountable. This is mine. I'm proud of it. And if I've made a mistake, please explain to me, and I will correct it. This is mine, and you bet I stand up for it.
When I look at your life and your career, and I think when people look from the outside, obviously a huge accomplishments, great success in the academic world as Governor General. You've written books. You had a career in sports as well, and they also see the side of you that I've described, how kind you are, how generous and gentle you are. But along the path, sometimes people's lives can be oversimplified. Along the path, there must have been some big challenges and struggles along the way. Can you shed some light on that? Life is not always a straight line.
Sure, many, Mark. I guess to be very personal, our number 2 daughter, Alex, is just publishing a book that's currently titled "The Other Side of Sorrow," Joy. She was not able to have children naturally. She couldn't carry a fetus in a room, and she and her husband engaged surrogacy caring moms for their fetus, and unsuccessful for the first 8. And then number 9 was coming along beautifully. And to make a long, sad story short, the caring mom got to the hospital too late, and the baby died in childbirth. And we were just devastated. And for 2 years, I spoke every day to my daughter on the phone, and we never once spoke about the loss of that baby. And I just saw the huge sadness in her life. But God bless her, she carried on and had 2 other surrogate babies, wonderful girls now, 12 and 11. And lo and behold, miracles happened. She gave birth naturally to Lucas on Christmas Day. Lucas is now 9 years old. And so that she's written a book about infertility and surrogacy. And I've read the manuscript 3 times, and the tears are running down my cheeks when I finish it, because I lived through that with her, not with the kind of pain that she had, but the pain of a parent who says, I can't fix this for you. I can't change the sorrow. All I can do is put my arm around your shoulders and live through it. And that for her is a great tragedy, for us a great tragedy. But I suppose what it's done is it's caused us to take greater joy in the joys of life. And in particular, in my case, 5 children and 14 grandchildren. In writing a book on empathy, we have a photo of our number 1 daughter, and I shouldn't say, it's just a photo of a woman crying and holding a baby in her arms, and the tears are running down her face. Well, that's our first daughter, whose husband had a fertility issue, and they adopted an orphan from the orphanage in Cali, Colombia. And this is a picture of her holding the baby for the first time in her arms, and it's empathy at its very best, a mother's love for this child. those are moments of great joy. But they both came, out of very, very difficult experiences. And life is difficult. We all have difficulty. And, the challenge is somehow to manage those difficulties, to try to be providing empathetic relationships with those who have them. And then, realize that for most of us, we're lucky that there's a rainbow at the end of the storm, and you kind of glory in that light. And that's been our life.
I've never heard you talk about that before, and that is incredibly touching and very sad, but I'm glad there were some happy endings there.
Happy indeed. Yeah, just matters of great joy.
And you do talk a lot about your family, your 5 children, your 14 grandchildren, and of course your marriage and your partnership with Sharon. Tell me more about your relationship with her. You often refer to it very, I don't want to say flippantly, but you make jokes at your own expense about Sharon getting the better of you and lines that she delivers. But obviously, that partnership is fundamental to your life. We saw it on display when you were the vice-regal couple in Canada. Tell me about the strength of that partnership.
Well, that may be a good way to begin, Mark. Sharon did not want to come to Ottawa to do the government job, as we call it. She was perfectly happy in Waterloo, loved the university. I would have gone on forever there. And she ran a 36-horse sporting stable. And this was a huge disruption. And while I say I find her public speaking both funny and scary, she's actually quite good at it, but she doesn't enjoy it and she doesn't look forward to it. So it was a big jump for her to say, well, okay, I've followed my husband and other things. I guess I'll do it for 5 years. And she was terrific. She worked really hard. She did her own thing and did it very well in her own way. But it was like running a marathon. She was kind of pacing herself and seeing the 5-year coming to an end. And then I was asked to stay on for another 2 years. And boy, the last 2 years were really, really tough on her. It's from 7:30 in the morning till 9 o'clock at night. And she worked really, really hard at it. And it took her about 6 months after we finished in October of 2017 to kind of recover her equilibrium. And it was an Easter Saturday morning, and she was up at 6 o'clock, which had been her usual rising time, 6:15. And she at her computer working away then, I guess, on the second novel in the trilogy. And at 11:30 says, all right, I'm going to ride. Went to ride, came home at 1 o'clock, said, okay, let the day begin. So it was recovering equilibrium from a really, really tough job, which she did well. And that's what she's done through her whole life. The situations I've been in as a dean of a law school, and then principal of McGill and president of Waterloo, and then Governor General have been really two-person jobs. And she's just been not just a kind of strong person behind the individual, behind the man, but operating in her own sphere, in her own way, and doing it very well. So, ours has been a marriage, it's been a partnership. And as I said, I was her first date at age 13. So she's a woman with a lot of patience to put up with me for all that time.
I knew it would finish somewhere like that, David, with something self-deprecating. What do you still want to accomplish? Because I know you still have an agenda. You still have a lot on your plate. You're still working very hard. So what's still on your list?
Well, I think, to keep my health, Mark, so that I can continue to get up every morning and being pretty excited about the day ahead. I guess my craft, my trade is I'm a law scholar working on the improvement of the administration of justice. So the other book we're doing now is the 6th edition of a book called Canadian Securities Regulation. If any of your friends have difficulty sleeping, one page from that book will do the trick, Mark. And this is book number 35 or 36, many of them being new editions of books that I wrote as a young law professor, but carried now by my former students. And in the case of this book, the 6th edition is being done in partnership with one of the major Canadian law firms with 2 of their senior people, and then a whole group of bright young lawyers to update it. And what really pleases me about that is that means that this book, which is a contribution to legal scholarship in this area, will continue on as a way of improving the administration of justice. And I guess so much of the writing that I've done, at least in law, has been with that in mind. You're trying to improve the law to make the law more just. And when you can have that carried on, by others, and the contribution continues, you feel, really good about that's, part of a continual improvement movement. And in my case, those were the skills and tools I had to be a writer of law, and I'm happy to be continuing to do that. I serve on a number of corporate boards and a number of foundation and voluntary boards, and I chair the Rito Hall Foundation, which we set up in 2012, and then the second year is GG, to kind of amplify the networking initiatives in Canada to kind of encourage those programs that make Canada a smarter and more caring place. And that's really flourishing with a great team led by Teresa Marcus and her colleagues. So that keeps me pretty busy too.
And just as we wrap up, is there any other message that you want to share with people? Is there any other life lesson or story or important theme that you want to make sure people hear from you?
Well, let me say two, Mark. One is I'm giving I guess it's a high school convocation address digitally to a school that developed for Syrian refugees in Toronto. And what I'll be saying to these young people, 16, 17, is be really proud of who you are, and be proud of your country, Canada. Be proud of the private sponsorship that was so key in bringing Syrian refugee families here. Quite unique, not just government sponsorship, but private sponsorship. And realize that, you, like waves of immigrants before, have chosen this country as a place to come where your parents have, for a better life for their children. And it becomes not simply a better life for their children, but for their neighbors and the neighbors you don't know. That is Canada. Bear in mind also that that's an advantage to have made that conscious choice, that you have an advantage of being resilient. You've known hardship, you've known adjustment, you've conquered it. You also come with several languages and a view on the world that permits you to be a special kind of citizen that helps Canada to play an important role in a more peaceful and more positively connected world. So that would be a message of that kind. I guess what I would say more generally is how lucky we are to be in this country, and how important it is that we don't be complacent about it. Civilization is a very thin veneer. As Hugh MacLennan once wrote in his last novel, Voices in Kind, civilization is like a garden that's growing next to a jungle. And if the gardeners are not disciplined in constantly cultivating, weeding, ensuring that the plants have life and sunlight and watering and so on, gradually the weeds will take over, the jungle will take over, and civilization will disappear. We have to work constantly at being more civilized, and that's the job of all of us.
Well, you've made such enormous contributions to keeping us civilized and making us smarter and more caring and kinder and gentler. David, thank you so much for sharing your stories and your lessons with us today. I genuinely appreciate it.
Great to be with you, Mark. Thanks so much.
I'm so inspired by David Johnston. I've seen so much kindness in him as he interacts with other people. The best, but sometimes most difficult way to be successful is to focus on others. And I think David Johnston has demonstrated that throughout his life, and I try every day to apply it to mine. So once again, a huge thank you to David Johnston for joining us on Digging Deep. If you enjoyed this episode, then please review it and share it with others. That will help us produce more great content. And if you want to keep digging deep into topics and lessons like this, then please subscribe to our weekly newsletter and read my blog at letsdigdeep.com. Thank you for listening.